Well, hello again. We are looking at Chapter 8. We are looking at political geography. I'm going to fast forward the slides to go to Key Issue 2 slides on why do boundaries between states cause problems. So here we go. Landlocked states. These are states that do not have any direct outlet to the sea. It's completely surrounded by other countries. Not very many countries stay within that. Not a whole lot of countries have actually are landlocked, but it is important to note that they do exist, and they have to make agreements with other countries to be able to ship things internationally. To be able to cross borders and be able to engage in commerce beyond their own country. Perforated, and we're going to talk about each one of these. We're going to start off by talking about compact states. These are the most efficient of all the kinds of states because it's very small. The distance from the center of the boundary does not vary differently between it and the boundary. It's very small. It's typically a circle. The most beneficial thing about a compact state is that communication is pretty easy because it's small and it's typically round. It's very easy to get word around from one part of the state to another. The next kind is called an elongated state. This runs into what we call potential isolation. It is long, it is narrow, and there are several countries, and you need to note the 4 countries listed in the textbook on page 247. You need to note the countries like Malawi, Chile, Italy, and Gambia. I'm sure everybody knows about Italy. It looks like a boot, and it's very long, and it's narrow. Chile goes all along the western coast of South America. Malawi and Gambia, these are both African countries, and you'll need to be looking at those as well. But you don't necessarily to know exactly where they're at, except to know that they are elongated. Another kind of state is called a prorupted state. This is, there's proruption. This is a compact state with a large projected extension. It's typically a standard-sized country, but it sticks out somewhere. It's prorupted. Okay. There are 2 principal reasons that countries become prorupted. The first is to give access to a resource like water. Another one is to separate 2 states that would otherwise share a boundary. For instance, when Nambia was a colony of Germany, the proruption disrupted communications along the British colonies. They wanted to have access to important rivers. It says here that it also provided Germany with access to Zambezi, one of Africa's biggest rivers, honestly. Another is a perforated state. Perforated. That means there's a country and it's got a hole in it. The biggest and most well-known is South Africa, the country of South Africa. And if you saw the map, which I'm going to forward to, you see the country of South Africa. And you can notice that, yes, there's 2 countries that look like they're poking a hole in it. Swaziland looks like it's doing it, but it really isn't, because part of the border of Swaziland is also shared with Mozambique. So it's really not, that doesn't make the perforation. The country that actually causes a perforation in South Africa is the country of Lesotho. You need to know this. This is extremely important to know that Lesotho is the country that makes a perforation in South Africa. Another kind of state is called a fragmented. Now, a fragmented is when you have pieces of it in 2 different places or several different places. It could be in some island nations off in the Pacific, it could be hundreds of pieces. They will be separated by water. Some can be separated by what they call an intervening state. Most notable that I remember is Russia. Russia has its huge, large country, but if you notice a map next to Lithuania and Estonia and Latvia, right to the left of all three of those, there's another line, another boundary there that's called Russia. And you'll notice that Russia is separated by several different countries in between. And they do this primarily so that they can have a winter port that is open year-round. All the other ports further north up into that sea, they actually get frozen. And so Russia wanted to have ocean access during the wintertime, and so they set it up that way after the Cold War. There's also what we call landlocked states. Now, when it comes to types of boundaries, there are two basic types. There is physical boundaries and cultural boundaries. Physical boundaries, very simply, can be deserts, mountains, or water. Now, that could be a lake, a river, an ocean can be a boundary. When it comes to desert boundaries, a boundary drawn in a desert can effectively divide two states. Just like mountains, deserts are hard to cross, and so countries, for instance, in North Africa, Sahara is generally proved to be a pretty severe boundary between Algeria, Libya, and Egypt. And in the north, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan to the south. Not a lot of people want to cross that desert to be able to go from one of those countries to the other. The other is a mountain boundary, pretty self-explanatory. And then there's the water boundaries. This includes rivers, lakes, oceans. These are most commonly used as boundaries. In fact, between the United States and Canada, we have a water boundary. But we also have another type of physical boundary, and that's a geometric boundary. Now, that's more cultural. And so, but you need to understand that the border between America and Canada is water when it comes to the Great Lakes and the rivers and the various gulfs that are in each side of the northeast end of our countries. But there's also a geometric boundary, about 1,300 miles that goes straight across at the 49-degree north latitude. And that separates both of our countries. You can Google that if you wish, and you can check out that, that line is pretty much there. And you can see that they've cut the trees, and for a lot of that, that's really a very, very straight line. When it comes to geometric boundaries also, the Aouzou Strip is a good example of a geometric boundary. That's the boundary between Libya and Chad. It involves a little bit of Niger, but it's primarily between Chad and Libya. It's just a straight line that's been drawn right through the desert. There are religious boundaries. These separate speakers of different languages or followers of different religions. The most notable here in the text is South Africa, when Great Britain had divided India into two states on the basis, or South Asia, not Africa, two states on the basis of religion, predominantly the Muslim portions over in Pakistan, and the Hindu portion, which is primarily the country of India. There are also language boundaries. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles separated a lot of countries along the lines of language. It says that the nation states created by the Versailles Conference on the basis of language lasted with minor adjustments through most of the 20th century. I'm going to talk a little bit more, especially when it comes to Cyprus's Green Line boundary. If you look at the island of Cyprus, in fact, I'm going to forward a little bit more. This is an example of a mountain boundary. I'll pause here just to see these pictures. They're quite nice. That's a simple example of a mountain boundary. But I am now going to focus back what I was just mentioning about the island of Cyprus. And you can see here that there is a northern Turkish area and a southern Greek area. There was quite a lot of conflict. And you will need to read on page 253 that section about Cyprus's Green Line boundary. It's the third largest island in the Mediterranean, but it has two nationalities, the Greeks and the Turks. The Turks are only 18%, and the Greeks are 78%. When Cyprus gained independence from Great Britain in 1960, which almost all of Great Britain's colonies after World War II ended up gaining independence, the Greeks and the Turks really did not blend very well. They actually did not like each other. There was a Greek military coup that was attempted to control the government. Turkey ended up invading Cyprus. And so the United Nations came in, and with Great Britain's help, and set up a buffer zone. And you can see that on the map. And you can see that the capital, Nicosia, was actually split in half. They had a divided capital city, but that was the only way that they could find to bring peace to the island. Now, we're going to go a bit further, and we're going to talk about unitary states and federal states. But before we get to that, you do need to note on the bottom of 253, there is something called a frontier, and you need to know the definition, that it is a zone where no state exercises complete political control. It is a tangible geographic area. And remember that there's a difference between a frontier and a boundary. The boundary has a thin, invisible, imaginary line. A frontier does not have a line. It's a zone. It's very different. You need to make a note of. Now, there are boundaries within states, and that's what I'm going to talk about on this particular slide. There's a difference between a unitary state and a federal state. You do need to know the definitions here. The unitary state is the most powerful. It puts all of the power in a central government. All right? Its officials have all of the power. And the example on the slide is, of course, going to be France, where their basic local government unit is called a department, and the second tier of the local government is called a commune. But most of the power in France lies within a unitary government. Very strong national government that dominates all of the local governments. Then there's something called a federal state. And a federal state is one that gives more authority to local governments. Example here would be Poland. And you can see this example on page 255, where in 1999, Poland adopted a three-tier system of local government. They were 16 provinces. They were divided between 12 and 42 counties, and then they were divided between 3 and 19 municipalities. And most of the things that took place in every town were actually done through the breakup of the government. The central government of Poland really does not have this extreme power over everybody that lives in the country. Now we're going to talk about electoral geography. There are some very interesting things, especially when it comes to electorates. What I mean by this is people in a population are divided up into parts according to population, ethnicity, language, etc. But they vote according to those parts, and each part gets a certain number of votes and a certain number of people. It's very, very interesting how this happens, but there is a problem when it comes to figuring out who gets what job in the government based on how many votes. There is a process of redrawing legislative boundaries for the purpose of benefiting a party in power. That's called gerrymandering. It's a very, very intense word when it comes to figuring out how you're going to divide up your population to set up who's going to vote for where, who's going to vote for who, and where they're going to vote. Gerrymandering takes place in three basic forms, and we're going to talk about those. There's the wasted vote, the excess vote, and then the stacked vote. All three of these are actually illegal. The wasted vote take the votes and it spreads opposition supporters across several districts to where they are actually the minority in those districts. And as a minority, they now do not have the voting block power that they would have had. Excess vote concentrates opposition supporters into a few districts so that they can carry those districts, but they won't carry the whole region. Stacked vote links distant areas of like-minded voters through oddly shaped boundaries. And it's very interesting. If you look on page 256, you can see some examples of these. And here is the actual the graphs themselves, and I'm going to enlarge this a little bit, talk about each one. This is called the wasted vote. You have Party A voters in blue, Party B voters in red. And you can see that one has actually been spread out so that neither party is actually going to have a majority. And it depends on how they divide up the votes. And here is one that's called an excess vote. And I want you to check this out, base it on the definition. And we'll talk when you get back to class and say, how does this express excess vote? Also, we're going to go to the third one here. This is called a stacked vote. And remember the definition, and be sure to check this out. The three forms. This is on page 256. And be sure to read the explanation underneath here to be able to get some basic understanding. Now, this concludes our talk. Make sure that you take good notes from what I've said, because I've gone through the quiz and I have made sure that everything that's on the quiz is on this video. Make sure you've got good notes, and let's be ready for class on Monday. See you later.